As exquisite a job as the reading was of the Kyroots, I would still like to redo one of them just because of the inflections. And that is, remember, they are flawed, but you are simply subject to natural, transient, systemic anomalies. I just wanted to be sure that that was good and clear, so everyone needs that information. It's just minimal self-preservation materials. I had several examples come to my attention that I was going to drag in tonight, having to do with some of the material that I was trying to turn your head toward for the last few nights. And I was about to preface it also by pointing out that I am totally aware, in case you forget at weak moments, of the difficulty of making sense of some of what I say, even after I give such warnings as, or to point out that I am, in a real sense, pulling out 4D information and dragging it down to a 3D level and trying to produce it in some reasonable, at least coherent, at least listenable fashion. In a sense, I am translating it. But as soon as I was thinking about saying that, I also realized, to me say, which is a fair statement still, that I am translating 4D material, at the very least, 4D information into 3D terminology, into a 3D world, into 3D ears. But then the world and history has been full of people that, in a sense, were claiming that they were translators. Nowadays, channeling. There's all these people that claim to be spokesmen not only for dead folks, but for the guides. Except this. Notice this. All these people claiming to be outlets, spokesmen, that say, for some reason the guides picked me and they gave me this information, they told me to bring it to you people. Notice this. All of those people, all the way across the board, all the stuff that they have to say actually needs no translation or no assistance. I mean, the difficulty, after they get this whole thing about how they went for years, or how the God struck them down for 2 months, or they lay in a cave dying in Tibet, and the God spoke to them and gave them this information and said, go back and tell the people. And they come out, and you think, well, my God, what is it? And it's stuff like, well, be good and brush your teeth, and God is love. But at any rate, I wanted to point that out, that I seem to be faced, you must admit, with a somewhat more complex problem than that. All right. It was such a beautiful example came up that I'm going to have to use it. I just ran across, in casual reading, a critic, and he was criticizing what perhaps may be a well-known science fiction story, I don't know, or a novel. And here was the critique. The critique was about the story, and it was having to do with, and I'll use some of the terms he used, time reversal. That's what the story was about. And he said that the story was fatally flawed. As well intended as the man seemed to be, and he insinuated that the man had some scientific background or else made use of current scientific knowledge, but he pointed out that the story was flawed. Now listen to me. I couldn't have made this up any better. Well, even if I could, it wouldn't be as good, because I'm presenting this as actually happened, because it did. He said the story was flawed, and that the author, as intelligent as he seemed to be, couldn't see it, or wouldn't have done it, with being the inference at least. And the flaw was thus, that the characters in the story were aware that time in their situation was running backwards, that dead people were coming out of the grave and getting younger, that the people in the story were aware of the fact that a cigarette burnt down to here would suddenly get longer and longer until it went out, that the characters were aware of the fact that time was going backwards because their consciousness, their awareness, was still going forward, so that in this strange world they could take this reversal of time and still plan for it. You see, that they knew the food chain works backwards here, so you got to watch it what you do. For instance, so he point. I shouldn't have got us off the track. Stay with me here, folks. The critic pointed out that the story, as well intended and etc. as it was fatally flawed on the basis that if indeed time was running in reverse in this world, wherever it was, or that the whole process of cause and effect would have to be across the board, that time just could not operate in isolation in such a way that the characters would be aware of it. In other words, what seems to run consciousness would also have to be in reverse, that the flaw was that here are the characters with consciousness, their awareness going ahead and running in straightforward time as we know it, and yet in some way the time around them, such as dead people coming out of the grave and getting younger, and cigarettes going from being a little short one to a long one, that is a flaw in the story. That could not be. The characters could not be aware of it. Now you following this? And so that was the end of his criticism. But now note this. Is anybody ready? Were it not for the flaw, as he puts it, or the characters being aware of the story, if the author had written the story in such a way that the characters were not aware of it, nobody, the reader, nobody could be aware of it. The story, if that was the heart of the story, that was the punchline of the story, you wouldn't get it. Do you get it? Do you hear me? There is the flaw in the critic's consciousness. There is the flaw in human consciousness. That were it not, did everybody get that? It's not all that tricky. It's a little tricky. But the flaw, as he puts it, that if it were a land somewhere, a planet, a world, this world, and that something miraculous had happened, and time was running in reverse, so that people got younger, and that rotten fruit on the ground sprang up to the trees and got red and ripe and then got green and then disappeared. That if all that was going on and the characters in the story were aware of it and had to live accordingly, that there is the flaw. That if time was actually running backwards, the characters' consciousness would be running backwards, and therefore they wouldn't see anything amiss. There would be nothing unusual. But if you wrote the story to where the characters weren't aware of it, you couldn't be aware of it. It'd just be a dull story. It'd be a story with no point. So, now listen to me. You are left now, since this was such a perfect example, with the fact that were it not for, is the critic, and the critic now let's use as ordinary 3D consciousness. If the critic were not aware of this, quote, flaw, he, that is human consciousness, would have missed the whole point. You got that? The story would be no story. You could call it time reversal. That could be the name of the story. And you'd read the story, and it'd simply be about the people went here and there, and one person lit a cigarette and smoked it and put it out, and fruit fell off a tree, and then his best friend died, and they buried him in the story. You would have missed the point if the characters were not aware of it. If this flaw, as the critic called it, remember I'm using the critic as human consciousness, 3D consciousness. If were it not for this flaw, there would be no story. All right. Now let me bring this up. Now. Were it not for a constant, everywhere, inevitable flaw, could consciousness see anything? Anything? Or would it be like the story, if you follow what I said, the story called Time Reversal? And you read the story, and it does not have this flaw. And you read the story, and you get through, and the truth is, all right, if that story was time reversal, and that's what it's about, I missed the whole goddamn point. Would it not be, I ask you, a like situation possibly that human consciousness would look at anything were it not for this, or some kind of, quote, flaw, and you would look at any and everything in life, and the feeling is, I missed the damn point. It would, as a matter of fact, what I am pushing towards, would it not be the possibility that everything that you think that you would observe, that you observe now, in a sense would become as invisible as the point of that story when the flaw was taken out? That it might be on the basis that, well, yeah, oh, that's a story, because I read it. I even read the name, and I thought I knew what it was about. But it's as though it was almost a blank spot. I read it, I spent time doing it, evidently. I checked my watch, and it took me 5 minutes or 5 hours to read it. But it's as though the story were invisible, that I absolutely missed the point. Were it not for what everyone, including, of course, life itself, on another level, has made people believe that continually there is a flaw. An inescapable flaw. Everywhere you look, there's a flaw. But were it not for the so-called flaw, I am asking you, would everything you look at, as a matter of fact, become, as it were, invisible? Or you might know, well, I'm looking at something, or I did something. In the last 2 hours, I know I was planning to go so-and-so, like I was planning to read this story. And now it's 2 hours later, I missed the whole point. Now let me ask you, if you like that, let's get dirty. How about this? Could it be, is there any possibility that life itself, that life's intent in feeding people like me this kind of information, that in some way is to perfect itself? That sounds reasonable up to that point, doesn't it? But what if life in some way could perfect itself, that is, become sans flaws? Might life become invisible to itself? Might life, trying to look upon itself, miss the whole point? Well, let's get personal. People in the city, I'll blame it on them since all of you came from the city. People in the city believe that, and imagine, dream of, but they would believe if they had to discuss it, that any kind of activity like this, all kinds of real spiritual, weird activity, must have as its purpose the perfection of the individual, to make you better. All forms of self-improvement, whether it be apparently as weird as this, or whether it just be physical exercise, going to school, but especially this kind of stuff. Their belief is that in some way it is to do away with your flaws, the imperfections of man. Based upon what I've already said, do I have to rub in the obvious? Could it be that if indeed that was the point, if there was any validity to that, and that you in some way could undergo, from the city view, from a 3D view, that you could undergo a kind of continual, if not abrupt, change in such a way that all the flaws of which everyone's 3D consciousness is apparently aware, that they were done away with? Do you know for a fact, can you hear what I'm saying, the possibility? Do you know otherwise that you might become invisible to you? That then you might look upon yourself, if you were flawless, if that was possible, if there was some way to judge it, and in a 3D world you could be without flaws to your consciousness. What if you then looked at yourself and you missed the whole point? That it made no more sense, that there was no more purpose or point to it than there was the story of time reversal if you took out the flaw, that is, of the characters being aware of the time reversal, whereas that ruins the whole effect of the story. It takes away the point. There is no point. What if you could do away with the flaws in your story, that is you, at the 3D level, and then you looked upon yourself, and the best you could say was, I missed the whole point. Let me push it just a little further. Me pointing out that people would believe, that people would say, that the purpose of activities such as this has got to be the gradual, if not abrupt, perfection of a man. There's another term that they've used for thousands of years, that in some way it is to create a level or a form of superconsciousness of oneself, all the way from what sounds to be fairly yellow circuit derived or based about know thyself, all the way from that into what would apparently be a little more emotional, passionate, active outcome that they keep describing as being more conscious, that you would have a supreme knowledge of yourself. Well, now what I'm describing to you now, this knowledge of oneself, if that is the apparent outcome, the payoff, then it's got to come about after this cleaning up of one's flaws, right? There would have to be that you would have to do away with the flaws, and then your consciousness of yourself through this struggle would rise, would expand. But what I'm presenting to you tonight, can you see that in a sense, if that occurred, if you could do away apparently with your flaws by some 3D standard, if you did away with it, instead of being more conscious of yourself, you would be less conscious of yourself. It would be as though the more you knew about you, the more you looked at you, the more that you were conscious of you, the more it is not a knowledge of me, not an awareness of myself, but it's almost as though I have missed the point. I'm serious. Now, everything I've talked about, if you want to look at it that way, about contrast, is that it would seem to be, I've even used terms not all that dissimilar to being more conscious. I still use little terms around the edges of that and expanding your awareness of what's going on. But do you see, if it was possible, if this kind of activity is truly to do away with one's flaws, to at least cut down on them, then it seems without any room for a real argument that if this flaw level begins to decrease, your consciousness of you would increase. Instead of you dealing with some out of control, subconsciously driven, evil piece of machinery, you're now becoming more of a real conscious, perceptive, knowledgeable human being. At the same time the flaws go down, you get smarter. You get more conscious of yourself. What if the flaws go away and you got a story with no flaws? Time reversal story. And you read the story, and where the fuck's the time reversal? There's no mention of the people, the characters, living their life conscious in the ordinary way, which is the only way that the story makes any sense. There's no way you can write the story. Is somebody has got to realize something is wrong. If they don't, you read the story, and 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 it gets to the end, and there's no way to tell that there was a time reversal. If indeed their consciousness was running the same way as the time reversal, it's no flaw. What if you are your own story? Or it was a movie, if you want to try it that way. And the more you see of yourself and you look upon yourself and the so-called flaws, the error in the script is extracted slowly. You would not have more consciousness of you. You'd have less and less to the point. And yet the world seems full even now of people apparently claiming to be involved with some kind of metaphysical and strange activity, and the point being to increase, to widen our consciousness and my knowledge of myself. Yes, I'm getting closer. I continue year after year, group after group, guru after guru, to slowly peel away. I get closer and closer to the core of what I am. I'm peeling away, layer by layer, my imperfections. my flaws, until I will get to this great core, the center truth, the seed of what I am. If that be true, if that be possible, do you not see that a fair conclusion could be otherwise? That if I continue to feel in this manner, and it's possible, and I am slowly perfecting myself, and I get the last layer gone, I will look upon me, and instead of some great moment of enlightenment and satori, it will be, Jesus, I missed the whole... I read a 500-page novel about time reversal, and I'll be damned if I see any point to it. Well, I guess that has got to have some validity. That's got to be too weird or what? Or else, what's the purpose in this? How am I ever going to sell this in the city? That instead of becoming super conscious of yourself, that you might become a I missed the point self. I become a living phenomenon of I missed the whole point. The story makes no sense. I spent 5 hours, I spent 5 years, I spent a lifetime reading this damn book, and I missed the whole point. I'm not super conscious of the point. I can't even conceive of what the point is. It's a good thing that that is indeed too weird or what. This would be another good place, I believe, to mention something that would apparently be, I'll start off with examples that apparently have more to do with out there. Because this is something that goes on continually. It's an example of what we're talking about and people miss on a larger scale. And that is, thusly, that the more clear-cut seems to be the flaw in some apparently external situation, something going on in contemporary history, the more clear-cut seems to be the flaw, and yet the more clear-cut it seems to be that this situation is going to run a tempo for a while in the direction it's going. It does not seem, it seems to be clear that it is not about to fold its tent and disappear. Then be assured that the first instance, those who are in the instance of those who would criticize the first part, that they understand less of what's going on. Now let me give an example since that got a little sticky. In our lifetimes, in the Western world at least, it's been a common occurrence that there be large segments of the population find fault with their government's attitude towards something. A common one being, not just in the Western world as a matter of fact, but a common one being that the apparent government of some group of people is involved with a dirty little war somewhere. And the government seems to say that we got to go fight this war or else these people will be on our doorstep. We got to fight this little bitty war to keep down a big war. And then you have for the last, easily, going on large parts of the world over the last 2 or 3 decades, then you've got large segments of that population rise up and say, well, that's hogwash. And if you had the kind of lateral flexibility to at least be entertained, if not informed by the great world at large, your own consciousness could sympathize, you could understand the first view, you could hear these groups of people, perhaps educated, perhaps a good segment of the population out marching in the streets and highways saying this war that you people, the government's fighting 2,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away, and you claiming that if we don't fight for our side, in our case democracy, that you claim that you are taking our tax dollars and helping to fight the dirty, ungodly, un-American communists. And if we don't do it now, that they'll be on our doorsteps and taking advantage of our wives and children and taking our cars. That is foolishness. And let us say that you got the kind of consciousness, you can go, yeah, it is. That's never been proven. The last time you people pulled that on us, it wasn't true. But then look that the situation shows, it seems to be fairly clear-cut. If you can pull your consciousness away from that view, that does not seem to be any immediate possibility that this situation is going to change, that things seem to be running right along, and that in some way, quote, the government's going to keep doing it. And you can see that. Then, what I was saying to you is your consciousness needs then to be able to step aside, take it one step aside, and use the look method, and realize that your consciousness and everybody else's that is criticizing the situation, and the criticism may make all the sense in the world. It may make more sense in the 3D world than the view of the government saying we've got to do this. Be assured that in the first instance of it seeming to be absolutely reasonable to criticize this and to say this is foolishness, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of effort, then your consciousness has no real understanding behind my pictures and my hints and my suggestions of such important cosmic possibilities as collusions. You do not, I'm saying you now in that viewpoint of a 3D consciousness from that position, you have no knowledge, you don't even have a good suspicion over the nexus of things. You do not in any way know how things actually work. Because the more clear-cut seems to be a position of reasonable, rational, logical critique of something going on in the world, and yet the thing seems destined to roll right along, then you need to be able to stand over in Eve's backyard somewhere and realize that you do not understand how things work. Well, that is sticky, isn't it? If you could almost join in, if it would seem to be that if there's any rationale, if there is any reason running the 3D world, then the criticism that some group of people, some part of life's body is making against itself, that there's some group against the use of peacetime nuclear production of energy, that they can just make every argument that you can listen with one ear and think that's true, that's true, that's true. That their argument, that's more sound than what's going on in the situation. And then you look at the situation, and you got the ability to realize, it's not that hard a thing to do, that this situation is not about to change, it's not about to collapse because of this criticism or anything. That this situation seems, and of course an ordinary person, they could blame it on all kinds of things. They would blame it on their imagination of some 3D banking collusion, some kind of secret power structure running the world, all that kind of old shit. But they might still admit, all right, we're out here marching in the street, and I'll give my life, I'll lay down in front of a railroad train, but I got to admit to. They say this after a little glass of white wine later after a demonstration. I got to admit to you, I'm not sure that anybody in our lifetime is going to stop them ramrodding atomic energy down the throats for peacetime use. Is anybody following her, or am I making it stickier? That there seems to be, you can see the position, you can feel the position of some large segment of people criticizing something going on. But then you can take one little step and realize you can just feel it, that this ain't going to stop. It's going to roll right along. That both things are going to go on coevally. They're going to exist, as far as I can feel, for the foreseeable future, probably my lifetime. And yet you feel the criticism is well-founded. This may go on, it may not kill us, I don't know. But the criticism by God is well-founded. Be assured. You have been struck blind. I don't know whether you played with yourself too much when you were a child, but you have finally gone blind because you do not even suspect how things actually work. Apparently I'm digging you in a hole deeper and deeper. You were surrounded by this constantly. I was trying to pick out, I thought would be the easiest when I started to get a glimpse of what would seem to be wider social, historical, public events back in the city. This is true on smaller levels, what seems to be your personal relationship, what seems to be the individual relationships between other people. I guess I'll wrap up this paragraph by telling you one more time. The more clear-cut seems to be a criticism of some situation apparently going on out here in the world, the more clear-cut, that is, the more you can see the validity, you can feel it. Your consciousness can jump right over this large number. It may be a large number. It may be almost 50% or 49% of the people of that city seem to be in criticism, active criticism of some situation that the other 51%, the ruling powers, seem to be running. And you can also feel, without any doubt, that the way things are going, it seems fairly clear-cut to me, are the way things are going to continue to run, regardless of this almost 50% criticism. And then you can feel the criticism is well-founded. It may not change, and we may get through it some way. But by God, the criticism is well-founded. This is, I don't know what they're up to, but they're on the wrong track. Ooh, you shouldn't talk about on the wrong track. No, darling. You're in the wrong freight yard. You don't understand how things work. And what's really delightful, since I've gone this far and nobody seems to be getting into this, I'll even throw in I'll put fudge on it before we dispense with it. Is sometimes the situation, that is, those apparently running it, such as the government, to use my examples that seem to entice so many of you, that the government at times will even bring in what is getting closer to at least a 3.5D view of the nexus of things by even saying, well, hey, if we don't fight this war, to go back to my first example, if we don't fight this war 4,000 miles away, or back these other people fighting the war 4,000 miles away, it's not just worrying about those little people come over here and get us. It's going to be these other people over here, the big guys, that are actually backing them down there. We'll end up, in our case, I've not made this clear enough, if we don't go down and fight the Sandinistas right now, we're going to end up fighting the Russians. The thing is, life is almost saying something out loud, and the beauty of it again is that people go, oh shit, that's just more excuses. That's more cheap rationale. That's just further proof that the situation is out of control. When the truth is, or the correctness is, that life is almost spilling the beans. And it's got to be walking away going, ha, ha, ha. Because the critics, to them, and they're not foolish, they're not dumb. As I'm pointing out, the critics, it can reach the level of 49% in the 3D world. That the critics will take that and say, Jesus, that's even further proof of the incompetency, if not the moral bankruptcy of our government and our leaders, to tell us that, because that's not true. When compared to their criticism, I'm not telling you it's true, but it's almost more true than some other stuff, that life is almost saying something. And yet that part of life's body opposing one part of its own body, will take that very thing, almost that hint, and take it as further proof that you're on the wrong track, further proof of your foolishness. And you think life does not have a sense of humor. There's a lot more to that, but I'm going to leave it, because some of you are already choking on that. Paragraph 2, then. Let's change the subject. Hit a few pieces I was mentioning last time, such as this. If you can personally begin to develop the ability to continually hear what is in truth your cellular voices, then you can personally feel, without any further debate, without me having to tell you, you can personally feel what I was mentioning last time of what is the actual non-event nature of events, that you can personally feel the reality of the fact that what seems to happen to you, what seems to be the events out here, I still give you the way out. little, like a good trainer in your corner, I guess. To realize personally that what happens in the world of events is, here's the way out. Almost of no consequence. Now, last time when I brought this up, a good handful of you people got at least a small body blow from that. It is by no means my attempt, because it couldn't work, there is no possibility of it working, for me to verbally convince you that what happens out here to you is of no consequence. Humanity, life's had humanity doing that in a sense, that attempt, for thousands of years, talking about that your reactions and your perceptions and your feelings toward what happens to your life is the real importance. So what happens out here we got sometimes no control over, so that's not it. You cannot be verbally convinced of that, but you can feel it. You can literally feel it, and I'm telling you in a sense, you can literally hear it. That what happens, but you've got to be able to personally have a continual hearing ability to your cellular voices, not the world's voice, which in a sense is the other end of a 3D loop. It's the other side of a coin. But you can hear. You can physically feel, if you don't think it's a difference, it's not just of loud sounds or soft sounds or high-pitched sounds. It's like a difference between very distant, piercing sounds and then sounds that are almost mink-lined. They're real warm, they're gooey, they're real personal. And they're the ones that talk to you. And you can feel it. That the worst thing you can imagine that seems to be an event out there and you hear about it, and it's something that affects you directly. And as soon as you hear, so-and-so died, and it almost knocks you down. If you had that ability, if you were trying right then, the sound that somebody told you, so-and-so died, and it goes in your ear, that is not really what you hear. That's almost of no consequence. It's not. It's immediately your cellular voices speak to you about that event. And once you begin to hear the difference, there is no discussion, there is no possibility that the two are the same. And there's no longer personally with you any question as to what I'm telling you. The events are of almost, I've done that twice, the events are of no consequence. And in the 3D world and through our verbal intercourse here, that, of course, will not stand up, because the death of somebody can have an effect. But that is really not what speaks to you. Yeah. It's not the sound of someone saying, so-and-so died. That got in there, but then your cellular voices knew it, and they speak. And it's what they say that's of consequence. Only them, not out here. That is the reality behind the old ideas that have so long persisted that it doesn't matter really much, or it doesn't matter as much what happens out there as it does your reaction to it. If there was no reality to that, it would not have lasted. As incoherent, as imperfect as it is, but it would not have lasted 3,000 or 5,000 years. But individually, a few people can experience the true discovery of that. And it does absolutely break down in the 3D world, because I am attempting to say one thing while apparently saying just the opposite, that to hear that somebody died, it's not that that's of no consequence. But the voice of life telling you that is the event speaking of itself, is not what affects you. If there was any other need for me, well, I'll leave this instead of saying a need for it. How long has humanity been trying to explain why the same event seems to affect people that should have a common interest, affects them in such diverse ways? And they can discuss it forever. I'm telling you, I'm not discussing, I'm telling you why. Because it's not the event speaking to people individually. It's their cellular voice not the event. All right. A few more connections. Since, as I point out, that all metabolic processes, that is the, of course, finding and then the expansion of energy, is at the cellular level. All forms. From you having good milkshakes, to you hearing bad news, to you feeling jealous, to you feeling moments of passion and compassion, to you apparently learning new information. It is all cellular processes. It is all metabolic processes. And as I was pointing out last week, or last time, that in a sense, a real description of man would be a state with notoriously unsecured borders, then what if not only you had the knowledge of that, but then you had the ability then to affect some control over your borders? Could you then see how it would be possible on a quiet, basic level to affect and direct your own growth through what you allowed across your borders, what you allowed your own cellular level to metabolize? Tell all the psychologists and all the would-be spiritual freaks throughout history to take that. All their damn dreams of Pinocchio and Rumpelstiltskin and God and Jesus and Jehovah. What if you could affect what your cellular level metabolizes? Because what it metabolizes is going to affect you. What it metabolizes is you. And you can think that you're speaking on the level of great organs, such as the, what you call it, the brain. But all of you that have forgotten, I suggest you go back and even pull out your high school biology book. And brains are more complex molecular combinations of tissues, and tissues are more complex molecular combinations of cells. That's it. If you are metabolizing energy, which you are, it is at a cellular level. And it gets a little more complex into tissues and into organs and into whole systems. And the systems believe there's somebody, especially one system in man. You know, we've talked about many times before, there's one system. No, it's not the digestive system. Some people, all they can think about is their gut. Or to put it another way, some people think from their gut, don't they? No offense to you, sir. But there are cellular systems that now say what? Believe what? That they are it. They can discuss cellular systems, and therefore they've got to be what? That's right. Above it, extrinsic from it, separate from it. Or else, how could they see it? How could my brain talk about the metabolic processes of my digestive system if it weren't superior? If it were not in some way different? It's got to be better than my stomach and my intestines, or it couldn't observe the other parts. Well, there is some validity to that. There is a 3D hierarchy. We've been through that. I've drawn up my own pictures and given you examples. But no matter how you attempt to cut it, no matter which way you attempt to deal the cards, you are still dealing with all metabolic processes. The use of energy throughout the system known as man is at the cellular level. So what if you had any control over your borders? What are you going to metabolize? What would you let in if you had some effect, if you had some control over it? And if you had that kind of control, then would you have some direct control over what is normally, laughingly, loosely referred to as change, growth? Also reminding you, I'll use a fairly, I believe, standard biological description of what growth is, at least at the cellular level, is the difference, if there be one. Well, in all organisms there is, we'll say. The difference between the degree of synthesis, the building up of more complex molecular structures, as opposed to the degradation, the tearing down the molecular structures from larger, more complex ones into smaller ones. Now that happens, that's been known, even back in high school you're supposed to have known that you can get a little 598 telescope and you can see that with little amoebas and other creatures from up north. But that is just a simple fact that there are two. Well, I'll give them credit in case any of you remember biology. They actually they observe three, but that's of no consequence here. But the two ways in which metabolism, the use of energy is taking place, of what they call synthesis or degradation, either building up from simpler molecular structures into more complex ones, or vice versa. And that growth is, in any particular cell, is whether it is engaged in synthesis, building up into more complex structures, more than degradation is going on. Again, fuck all those spiritual people. There's your answer. They're worrying about, do I do good deeds? Am I going to be judged someday? And the gods look down and say, well, we got a whole row of good stuff he did, but boy, look over here, all this bad stuff. Forget that. Forget about sins and goodness and all that. Synthesis and degradation. Are you tearing down, which organisms can metabolize? It's going on all over. Sometimes I think some of you people now like to refer to it as what? Like D possibilities, or D force in action. It is going on. It is the expansion of energy. To tear down a building expands energy. It produces energy. The same way as building a new building. But rather than look at whether I'm going to be judged in some way and whether I'm doing good or evil, look at it on the basis at the absolute cellular level where all metabolism takes place, no matter what your brain says. At that level, am I synthesizing more? Am I engaged more in synthesis than I am degradation? That's it. Am I tearing down more complex structures into simpler ones, or vice versa? There's the final judgment day. But you don't have to wait and go to Bakersfield or heaven for that. All you got to do is say, hello. The ancestral voices are calling. It's a cellular phone that you don't even have to pay a monthly charge for. Well, I almost forgot. As I was coming out, they gave me an announcement. I wanted to be sure. It said there has been the discovery of a new entity. The insulting force, but there seems to be a dearth of details yet coming in, but just knowing that they have made this new discovery, it immediately brings up, as far as I'm concerned, several immediate questions. Where did it come from? How might it fit in with the scheme of things? And of course, what is its possible purpose? It's this kind of thing we'll have to wait until further inroads are made and time to investigate this. But at any rate, I did want to make you aware of that. How about a whole new paragraph? I want to tell you about this revolutionary, or at least my revolutionary, I'll say, view, use, and description and definition of games. I used to speak about the game going on down the playing field and this being like a game, that is human life. But let me give a definition of where I want to take it, of what a game would actually be. the bushes, the city, everywhere. What a game is. Well, my first description is really more aligned to the reality of what they are in the ordinary city world. As a game, first, they have to propose, they have to put forward a goal. The aim of the game, the purpose of the game, right? Then, they immediately have to do this. They have to establish, they call them rules, but I want you to see that what they amount to, without any doubt, is prohibitions. But they're prohibitions against certain actions that are goal-oriented. Have you got me? They have to state the aim of the game. But then immediately, that wouldn't be a game if that was it. You understand? There's got to be these two things. You got to state the aim. You know, run the ball down to here. Or play the game until you go around the board and win all the money or win whatever. You got to state the aim. Everybody goes, yeah. But then you immediately, to make the game a game, you have got to establish that there are certain actions that one would immediately. Have you got me? They have to state the aim of the game. But then immediately, that wouldn't be a game if that was it. You understand? There's got to be these two things. You got to state the aim. You know, run the ball down to here. Or play the game until you go around the board and win all the money or win whatever. You got to state the aim. Everybody goes, yeah. But then you immediately, to make the game a game, you have got to establish that there are certain actions that one would immediately, or else they wouldn't be prohibited, that one immediately wants to take in pursuit of the aim. You've got to immediately prohibit certain actions that would lead to the aim, right? Then you got a game. That is the only way you got a game. Now I'd like to ask you, does that sound at all familiar regarding the human condition, the human position? Can you see that the way it's set up in the city, that the game man is drafted into, the game that you're given, it's not all that far removed from what I'm saying. The aim is to what? The goal of the game is to change. No matter how you cut it, no matter what language you speak, everybody on this planet feels that. And it doesn't have to be spiritually based or couched in metaphysical terms. The goal of everyone's game is to change. And then life immediately establishes prohibitions concerning certain activities that a man might make to effect such a change. And it's not just prohibitions. Can't just leave it at that. I'm going to be a little more specific. Vague, comma, unstated, comma, uncertain, comma, shifting prohibitions. That make the goal impossible. I want to ask you, is that a goddamn game or is that a game? Is that the kind of game that would give the Parker brothers headaches? Make the Wham-O Corporation dizzy? Make Mattel say, oh, swell. Make Ken and Barbie go in the closet? Well, never mind. That's enough of that. I am suggesting to you that that is a game to do life proud. All right, now let's jump back to my opening definition of a game just in the city. Were it not for those two, I defy you, as always, or I'll welcome you, to find any flaw in this, to add to it, to subtract from it. But there are the two minimum, and it covers everything. There's nothing else you can add that has any particular pertinence by itself to those two facets of a game in the city. That there's got to be an aim, there's got to be a goal, there's got to be a purpose to the game. But then there's got to be prohibitions against certain actions that are goal-oriented. That is, actions that would seem to propel one, to bring one closer to affecting the goal. You've got to have those two minimally. And I'm also suggesting maximally. Covers it all. You got to have those two, you got no game. Nobody would play. Everybody would hear if you leave out either one of those and you just give the goal and that's it. Or if you just say, well, here's the prohibitions, you don't give the goal, then everybody would feel like what? I missed the point. There would be no game. No one would play. Nobody could understand it. But so let's say no one would play. Now do you see what a delightful game that we have been drafted into? You're given the goal. It's down to molecular level. Of course, the molecules could talk. I was going to speak for them and say that the molecular goal is the same as the game of life. It's to find and to expend energy. In the case of man, it is not just survival of the red circuits, not just survival of the observable organism. It is the expansion of energy is for synthesis, to grow. That life through man is not in the process of degradation as a whole. That the overall is a process, the overall metabolism, the overall use of energy in life's case through man is synthesis. That is the building up of more complex molecular structures rather than a tearing down from more complex into simpler ones. So the game comes out in man, as I put the name on the goal, is to change. Here and there, man could say, well, it's to make myself better, to improve myself, to whittle away some of the flaws. All that still fits the goal, as I'm telling you in words, is to change. That won't do. There's no game there. You've then got to have rules, prohibitions. And the prohibitions in the game of life, that life has placed man in, the prohibitions are such, all the way from being impossible to too vague to understand, too uncertain, ever-changing. Suffice it to say, all it takes is a non-critical, good, let me take a look, and you realize that in the ordinary circumstances, the prohibitions are such as to absolutely forbid that anyone ever accomplish the goal. You have a game that is a game. You got a game that nobody could ever come up with. You got a game that would finally defy the patent office, because you've got a game that produces in man the dreamed of perpetual motion machine. That is man in the game. The cellular level knows the goal, but the cellular level cannot discuss, cannot really conceive of what, in a 3D sense, comes from the other end of the loop. It's so large, there's just overwhelming to the cellular level, plus it's outside its bailiwick anyway. But is the world, the great world of prohibitions, and the prohibitions are such that in any one lifetime the cells cannot reach the goal. They'll never get to the goal line, they'll never get back to goal on the monopoly board, they'll never checkmate. They can't. The game would stop. The metabolism in the direction of synthesis, that is of growth, would reverse itself. You can never reach the goal. The game cannot be won. For those of you who are really good, though, I was going to let Kyroots handle this one. I'd already kind of hinted to him that he's going to come out with this one sometime, a few weeks from now. But it's this. I'm going to go ahead and ask you. Are any of you sharp enough to see that the rules of a game are actually the game? Well, some of you did hear something. That does not belie what I said, that to have a game, really, you got to have the goals stated and the rules, the prohibitions. But in a sense, if you're sharp enough, if you're fast enough, you can see that the prohibitions, the rules themselves, are the game. Now, if you can see that, some of you would just put your foot in it. If you could make that an operational directive, then you'd have to, from this moment on, live differently. Because then you could abandon even the cellular cry out of your ancestors of look over here, that is, remember the goal. All you got to worry about is the prohibitions. That's the game, because you're not going to get the goal. The game itself, it is again a brilliant piece of misdirection. To holler, well, the purpose of the game is this goal. That is the definition of the game. That you don't have a game unless you make a touchdown, make a home run. Checkmate. So what if you could see that from a very real view, the game is simply the prohibitions. The game is the rules. That's it. Well, does anybody find that to sound vaguely familiar, at least from my descriptions, of what the ordinarily constructed yellow circuits are? How soon you forget that. I used to describe, and many of you would go, yes, amen, talk about it. I'd point out to you that under all ordinary conditions, what is called the human intellect operates on the basis that there has to be confines to it. There has to be the contrast of what it apparently knows and what it doesn't know. Or as I used to put it to you, like this great field with a fence around it. And you tell the intellect, hey, you are not absolutely free. You cannot think the unthinkable. You cannot fly off and visit the cosmos and dream up anything in the world. You cannot educate yourself past a certain point because you're fenced in, damn it, and the fence won't move. But the fence is the part you're talking to. Remember that? And I would describe consciousness as electricity in a fence, an electrified fence. And you tell the fence that, and the fence runs from right here, listening to you, all the way around this perimeter and comes back and says, you're a damn lie. I went all the way around, and there is no fence. And you cannot say, well, you can't see the fence, old stick, because you are the fence. The limits are what you are. That doesn't sound familiar to what I'm talking about now. The game is not something with prohibitions and rules. The rules are the game. Take away the rules and what have you got? Everybody's always crying. Humanity's always had people crying, we want freedom. They think they mean political, they think they mean economic, sexual. That we want freedom, damn it, more freedom. And of course, it cannot withstand any sort of real cold-bladed inquiry into, okay, what kind of freedom? What do you mean by freedom? Because, of course, you cannot run ordinary consciousness up into that cul-de-sac, but what it would amount to is they'd have to run around the limits of what they are, and they'd come back and really have to tell you, I don't know. That's an ACB because that does not happen in the city. They would come back with an answer, because I want somebody's foot off my throat. And all they're talking about, is I want to move up in the pack. If there was such a thing as freedom. I mean, some of you were around a long time ago. I asked you, and I never made much comment about it, to go away, and as a little endeavor, is to imagine that you had unlimited income. To really try and picture it, whatever that would be to you. Surely, how about $1 million an hour? Comes into you tax-free. Remember that? And I said, go off and really try and neuralize, try and ponder, what would you do if you had that kind of income? Forever. It can't be stopped as long as you live. The tax is paid on it. You can get it any way you want to, or it's deposited somewhere. Every hour, $1 million. 24 hours a day, into your account, into your pocket. What would you do? I didn't bring that up as fairy tales. And I didn't go back and pursue and hold you down and make any of you tell me whether you got anything out of it. A few of you did kind of run up against the fence. Some of you kind of scraped your forehead and then wiped the blood off, and it was like, well, I don't want to think about that. That's silly. I'm working on myself, trying to get to be better. I don't have time for that. Back to where I was, in case you think I'm no longer where I was. Can any of you see? Well, the unsaid part was that ordinarily people would think that a game, that the rules are the inhibitions. Or, in other words, people are always trying to find a way to cheat, putting cork in baseball bats now. You're playing chess with somebody, and if they're that slow-witted, I guess you holler, "Hey, what's that over there?" And then, you know. Or if you consider blackjack a possible game of skill, card counting, but really cheating. In other words, some way to get around the rules and you could win the game. Now that may apparently work at a chess table or with your friends or in Las Vegas, but now I'm asking you, can you see the idea that in some way I could cheat, that were it not for the rules, in other words, hey, from here to the goal, from here to for me being without flaws, for me being able to change, it'd be a cakewalk. I could lay down and slide over there. It'd be nothing. Were it not for all of these prohibitions, were it not for all these damn rules of the game. Can any of you see, he asked again, that the rules are the game? As long as I'm talking about games, let me put this one on you. Can any of you see, this is an attempt, I guess, for me to try and get you to undertake some of your own translations from a 4D world of info into the 3D world of cold, harsh, New York, Oregonian, Californian, Floridian, etc. realities. That there is a way in which you could look upon the idea of games in another slightly different way, and that would be that ordinarily men are playing, if we call it a chess game of sorts, that men are playing only with pawns. That all that you can do in the city is move in a straight line. Optimum circumstance, you can go forward and backward. But it's one move at a time in a straight line. But life has every possible piece. And it is always making surprising moves on man, coming at him from unexpected directions. You know, well, I assume that all of you know enough about chess that you're already laughing, that if you got all the other pieces, and all you are is a pawn. Look what life is doing suddenly, coming at you from the rear, from the sides, or God forbid, nights. They seem to be out of nowhere, just suddenly over here. Am I describing the nature of life in the city or what? And yet people are always shaking their fist at life, jumping off the bus at the Port Authority in New York. Hello, New York, here I am to conquer you, you big old city. Because I'm going to pray to the gods, make them take mercy on me. I'll curse the gods, I'll frighten them. I'll make pacts with evil gods, anti-gods. You can do all that, and you're still left like this. You got the assurance, the power, the insight of a sleepwalking pawn. And life has in its possession every possible piece on the chessboard. It will, just anytime it wants to, it just makes a move. And here you are, shot from every possible side. That's not bad, because that didn't really force you into the fourth dimension. That's even three-dimensional, it makes sense. But now imagine it's four-dimensional. It's not life, which of course it's not. It's not life, it's not info, it's not experience, it's not possibilities, just working on the 3D, plain 3D reality of a chessboard. It's not just life being able to do this. You got things coming, is of course what I keep. I say of course, some of you I guess have tried to stretch your brain. It's what I keep meaning by right angle. To talk about a right angle from here doesn't prove anything. It's really right angles is what I keep talking about, because if I say a right angle from here, then whatever you picture, like, all right, going somewhere that I wouldn't ordinarily imagine, all right, that. But then it's got to be a right angle from that. Now I don't mean this. You now got to go somewhere that there is no description for. That's where the information is coming from. That would be the more the reality of how life is working. But as I said, I kind of like that one since I just thought of it, that even now at the chessboard level, in other words, it's 3D allegories that are almost 3.5. Oh, all right, 3.2. All right, another paragraph. I started to put this one on the slogan board, but we used it up. That is this. It's not a completely new paragraph. It's also tied into what I was just talking about. There is hardly enough time in life to be very subtle. One reason I get reminded of this is the correspondence I get from people that have gotten their hands on those public books that I wrote, those 4 books, and even these outlines from the transcripts. This happens to me personally, but it's happened throughout life. You can read stories of it that would-be so-called holy and religious people throughout history have inferred once they were asked that they did such things. And that is, people believing that in some way I have tricked them, or the way in which I wrote a book, or that they wrote me a letter 6 months ago, and they wait 6 months and write me back and tell me they've been chewing on it, and they'll requote what I told them. To tell you the truth, sometimes I can't remember exactly what I told them. But they'll requote, well, I can tell when I'm being misquoted. But at any rate, and they'll write back and say, I thought that you said so-and-so, and I believed it was a trick. Well, somebody, they've been passing around, I found out, some of it without my authorization, if we want to call it that, kind of bootleg audio copies of some of these tapes in the last couple of years. They've been floating around. In my description of that substance in the blood of MV12, I found out that some bad copies have been around, audio-wise, and there's been some people believe that I was saying that what you needed was shots of B12. But then one case when I heard about that, the person contacted me directly, and I wrote them back, and I pointed out I couldn't go back to everything I'd done, but I referred them to try to find some more material that was not true, that they had simply misunderstood because of a bad copy. And then this person waited a few months and wrote me back that, they understood now what a subtle trick that was on my part. In other words, inferring that I had actually said, vitamin B12 shots, or had made such bad copies that made the people think that, so that they would think that in a certain way, and I come back and kind of trick them to get them to see something else. All right, that kind of thing. But surely all of you have read enough to know that there are now stories about Buddha, Jesus, everybody, that after the fact, or even while they were alive, some of these would-be or so-called holy men and Sufis and wise guys, that somebody will say, why did you 20 years ago, I was there and saw you insulted the prince of such and such country when you were there? And he says, yes, I remember that. He said, why did you insult the man? He never got over it, and he threw you out, and you could never go back, and I missed hearing you. We could never get the benefit of your wisdom. And then the guy comes out, supposedly, through mythology, through the tales, this great story about, I could see the future, and I understood that if I stayed there with the prince at that time, and I'd been nice to him, then if I'd settled there, I would have ended up married such and such, and my son would have grown up to be a murderer, and this whole complex thing. But through my great wisdom at the time, through this subtle trick, that you thought I was doing one thing, I was actually doing something else. And of course the punchline, the outcome of all of such stories, is that the hearers are sorely amazed and impressed at the subtle workings of the superior mind and superconsciousness. I understand that, but it's built in to the human wiring system to want to believe in that. That's just a short step from the international collusion in the 3D world. And I bring all this up sort of for that punchline to point out to you, and I'm not just talking about me and would-be holy men, and I'm talking about everybody at every level, that life here is just about too short to be very subtle. That I can hear all the tricks. I can have people accuse me of having tricked them at one time. And it's not really startling that, that would have, I'm amazed, I'm sort of impressed that they can perceive such a possibility, that they can conjure it up. That, that is the kind of thing that I could have thought of. That is the kind of thing that I could have done, and over a long period of time could have set up the possibility of you reacting in that way, of it triggering something in you, and maybe somewhere way down the line you went, now I see what a spiritual, what a admirable piece of misdirection you did to me. Life is just about too short to be very subtle. Now, as always, do you suspect I bring this up for some individual reason in each person's case? Look how you think you treat you in many cases. That within your own state, you got your own guru. I don't have to keep talking about Jesus and Moses and all these Sufi and yogis. Well, you got one. You got one or you wouldn't be here. It's a part of you that believes. It's part of you that says it believes that I want to change. I'm your good guy. I'm your hero. I'm your Hoot Gibson, your Johnny Weissmuller. I'm your white-headed cowboy. How subtle, how deceitful, but how subtle is the word I really want to use if you follow. Does that part of you try to treat the other part of you? I know without a doubt that none of you have ever used this terminology or this picture in your thinking about yourself. But now I brought it up, I suggest to you that all of you treat yourself very subtly. Well, it's either that or you would be treating yourself harshly, and I have not noticed any of you in any danger of treating yourself too harshly. Sorry. About the harshest you'll treat yourself is maybe to ask me, you think maybe, is there a possibility maybe I should, I don't know, should I maybe cut down on smoking? Should I, you think maybe I should lose some weight? Do you think maybe I shouldn't, oh, I don't know, I know this is, should I consider planning someday to perhaps try to not worry as much? I have yet to have any of you people come to me and say, I have taken some drastic action along what seems to be a proper code of conduct for me, and it's almost killed me. Do you think I've overdone it? In other words, I've had none of you come to me and say, I guess you notice how almost perfect I've become. Am I overdoing it? Of course, that were true. You'd come in on a crutch and half of you bandaged up, and you'd look like living death. And I don't see that happening. Life here is almost too short to be very subtle. Now, in a sense, I've been subtle. Now, if anybody's been noticing, even though you still had no occasion to use such terms, as time seems to progress along the everyday line of us being here making tapes, and we are apparently in the 3D world, if any of you have noticed, in a sense I'm less and less subtle. If you hadn't looked at it that way, for some reason, have you noticed how you are more and more individually disinclined to come to me with subtle questions, with subtle problems? At least I've got you trained that at least you'll hide it. About the only thing you'll ask me is, should I do so-and-so, yes or no? Just, of course, that doesn't mean you're going to do it. And I hate to waste my time and energy, but I've got that cut way, way down now, these subtle problems. So let's sit around and talk for about an hour or 2 hours until I can really, because this is a complex problem I got, and it's going to take me a while to tell you, but I know you'll be interested, and I know you need all the details. Have you noticed that none of you do that anymore? Now, you people out of town, especially those of you that never been here, met me, I guess you think, boy, you wish you were here, because you would. Every night or 2 or 3 times a week, you'd have me out at a coffee shop, pouring your heart out, weaving the web of all your problems, because they're so individual, so interesting, so personal. I've got to hear all the details so I could make any possible judgment. Life here is almost too short to be very subtle. And you people who now have heard anything, you people that have any sympathy with that fictitious code of conduct, have a strong suspicion on a good day when the humidity is just right and the sun is shining, you have a strong suspicion there's not really much left to any kind of subtle approach, subtle question. In fact, with most of you, if there is such a thing in a better world, in a more synthesized world, it's almost the opposite. That you don't really want to talk about it because the answer is known. Because the answer, as the man said, the strange thing, the more he finds these apparently important questions, it seems that over and over he realizes that the answer is always the same. The answer is him. That what is there subtle to ask? I refer you back to the first time most of us ever met. And you thought that I was Henny Youngman's illegitimate cousin. When you understand that life is almost too short to be very subtle, and when you understand that the cellular voices keep saying, over here, you understand then the one question, the only non-subtle question is, Doctor, what can I do? It hurts when I do this. That is a man, that is a situation that understands there is not much time to be subtle. Don't do it. Yeah, but. I guess if I had time to invent things, I would invent a subtle detector for all of you, and you could wear it instead of a watch, if need be. Of course, you actually need to wear it somewhere other than your wrist, and I don't want to go into it. It might be with women and children listening. But the detector should be placed somewhere else, I'll say on the body, somewhere else about the body than one's wrist. But be that as it may, since I haven't invented it, everyone's safe. Something else. We still got tape that I've been trying to get to for a long time, if you like inside gossip. And that's a new method I wanted to mention to you, and it's called the exacto lip method. Well, to make sure that you're hearing me, does that show up? Yes. Can you see it? Now this is for those who understand, as Saul said, that life is almost too short to be very subtle. Such as, I'll give you an example right quick before I really describe it. This will probably answer it to most of you. Remember the Curio fictitious Code of Revolutionary Conduct. To be more exact, to do not say, I cannot, say, I will not try. The exacto lips method is that you make your lips correct the attempted misspeaks of your tongue. Now we're talking about the cellular level again. We're talking about reality. I'm not just being funny. Is your tongue is continually, pick out what word you like, desires to, wants to, seems destined to, is about to misspeak, such as, well, I'd love to, but I simply can't. All right. You understand what the exacto lips method is. You don't fuck with your tongue. You don't try to rehabilitate your tongue. You don't try to reform your tongue. Never mind that. Jump up to another level, or at least out to another level. Make your lips correct it. Make your lips say what your tongue seems incapable at that moment of saying. Translate. Reform the misspeaks of your tongue. Don't worry about your tongue. Don't try to go back and change it. Hell with that. Your tongue's too old. It's too set in its ways. Why be settled? Don't try and reason with your tongue. Your tongue is about to say such things as, well, I would, but I can't. Your lips, because they have not been used for this purpose before. They're somewhat virgin areas, You got to turn your lips into revolutionary spokesmen, watchdogs. And you make your lips correct what your tongue was going to misspeak. That, get back on it, can play the music. That is the exacto lips method. It is not subtle, it is directly to the point, and it is non-fail. Because all you've got to do is remember the exacto lips method, and your lips, if you'll notice this, here's what is strange, and it'll be surprising. Most of you that are hearing in this will hear this as soon as I say it. You don't have to try it. Your lips will never be mistaken. Once you put your lips into revolutionary use, your lips are never confused. Your lips will never go, wait a minute, how exactly is my tongue wrong, if indeed it's wrong this time? It operates just like that. It will instantly correct. It will instantly rectify and reform, straighten out the misspeaks that your tongue was about to make. Takes no effort other than to remember to use the exacto lips method. They never fail. Never. There is, for those of you that will undertake this, it is immediate bypass to all attempted forms of subtleties. There is a second order of this, and that is to correct the misthinks of the mind. But I'll let you take that off on your own. And another slight reprieve from something I mentioned off and on for the last several times, for a long time, but I want to point out specifically that I've used this kind of reference many times, using as an example and springboard the arts, people's behavior, and etc. But I want you to look at it as what would appear to be more of an informational area. Yellow circuit, mental activity, the thoughts, opinions, theories of people. Specifically this, that as long as you are harboring any animosity toward a thing or a process, then you absolutely, physically, literally, scientifically, you lack the proper vantage point to study it. And here is why. And this sounds as though it's going to be allegory. And it's weird. Is it too weird or what? We'll see. Here's how weird it is. To criticize something, and I mean in the full sense of criticize, it could pass for some kind of intellectual, reasonable critique. But to criticize anything, you've got to bend over. Yeah. You have got to squat, because you have got to get down to a lower level, as far as you can tell, or it would not be open to your criticism. You have got to be, now this is the way it appears. And to you, appearances are down there everything, if you're ordinary. That you have got to be superior to the thing, or you would not be criticizing it. It would be up to par. It would be up to your specifications. So to criticize it, you got to bend over. But now, this is the 3D world. You got to bend over and you got to squat down. And once you do, you're at the same level as that which you think you're criticizing. Then all of your so-called ability, all of your so-called position, your apparent right, your privilege, your duty to criticize, if there was such, is shot to where? Not Tarzana, to hell. It's gone. You are now on the same level, as allegorical as it sounds, but you are physically at the same level as that which you're attempting to criticize. And then, if there was any validity to start with, that you were in some position through your education, your experience, your innate superiority, which of course, but if there was any validity to that to start with, that I am superior to this one thing going on in life, this idea, this movement. If there was any validity, for you to criticize it, you've got to squat down to criticize it. And once you do that, if there was any validity to start with, that validity got on a bus. Because you are now literally at the same level as that which you're criticizing. That is the flaw. That is the 4D flaw that cannot be seen and cannot be logically proven in the lateral world to ordinary people, is the flaw of being hostile, of being righteously indignant. That in some way you can learn from that. That in some way you can produce art from that. That's just an accepted fact in the city, that to be a true artist, that probably the primary fuel is indignation. And they'll point, in the city they'll point to the artists of history, or they can point to getting outside of arts, they can point to what they call spiritual teachers, the Moseses and the Jesuses. But they'll point out that the arts, all the great movements of thought, of philosophy, was based upon some kind of indignation of somebody somewhere looking upon life, or their life in that community, in that state, and saying this is not right. And that their righteous wrath, their intellectual ire was raised to such a degree that this art was produced, and that's not art. It's on the same level as that which is critiquing. I don't mean it might not be graphically or colorfully attractive, or if it was music, I don't mean that you couldn't listen to it. But to say that it's art, to say that it's superior to that which it is criticizing, that's 3D truth. But it's not correct. It is not correct. Because the artist, the critic, has squatted down. You've got to get the same level, and even if there was any validity that you start out knowing more than that which you're criticizing, then some way you were superior, you lost it. Because you are now bent over, you are squatted. You are at the same level as that which you are criticizing. Tell all the spiritualists and their holy people about their ideas about love your neighbor and all that. Tell them again, I said, get fucked. Because there it is. It's not spiritual, it's not religious, it's a fact. Of course, don't tell anybody. I'll be up to my goddamn elbows in Baptisting people. No, I won't. See, I'm safe because I'm a Baptist. No, I'm not. But once I considered it until I found out that being a Baptist wouldn't stop you from drinking and screwing and having fun, it just stopped you from enjoying it. So, in my wisdom, my ability to criticize when it's deserving, I understood, hey, later for that. That's a little joke, folks, out there in TV land. You strike it from your memory. It's like you missed the whole point that I didn't do that little bit. One final thing I want to bring up, that time to mention it. It comes and it goes. Is any of you that feel as though you're actually involved? When I say feel as though, I don't mean to say that you're not, but that you have undertaken something that you have no doubt would take additional effort for you, that it should expand your experience, that you are going against your natural inclinations in some job you're doing. Maybe you change jobs, or you're trying to change your social life outside the group, that you're trying to do something that really you would have never ever done. And I take responsibility for you attempting to do it, but the time can come with everybody that in a specific situation you feel as though you are up against a brick wall. When you have that feeling, take yourself a comma break. It is not desertion from the duty, and it is not any form of weakness, but temporarily turn away, because you will reach the point. There's only two possibilities. If you're attempting to do something that you would have never done, something that's taking continual effort, that you went out, let's say, and you finally found a job that you just despise. There will come a time, and I don't mean it has to be years, I don't even mean it has to be months necessarily, that whatever you got from it at this point in the 3D time for us to talk about, that you have reached a brick wall. That whatever it is that you have gotten out of it for the time being, you have gotten it, and that's it. And it's now just a form of slow torture that's unprofitable. All right, don't get hung up my words. I'm telling you, if you feel, I'll leave it to you, if you were man or woman enough to understand enough to go out and try something like this, which almost all of you have done, but if you're there and you feel what I'm saying, that's a fair description, that you're against a brick wall, that you just don't seem to be getting anything, it's just like a brick wall, turn away from it. You may not ever have to go back when I say temporarily, but look at it as a comma. You might go back. But there comes a time in those things, as I said, there's only two possibilities. One is that you get every possible piece of benefit, knowledge, new info that you can. If that's so, you won't feel like it's a brick wall. The whole thing will disappear like I missed the point. That is, you've eaten it and now you can no longer see it. That's another flaw, as they would say in the city, that you have overcome. So it's something that you are more conscious of, right? Wrong. Something I'm less conscious of. Oh, I see what you mean, really? We've been through that earlier this evening. But if you actually feel as though you're against a brick wall, and this has happened, some of you have mentioned it off and on and here and there and insinuated, and some of you have never mentioned it, and I have seen it, but there is no benefit of doing something which is of no benefit. And no matter that it started out, and it could have been based upon a sound revolutionary principle, doing something that you would not have ordinarily done. As soon as you feel that I'm just up against a brick wall, that is, I am no longer getting any benefit, none whatsoever, do not try to rationalize it, don't feel guilty, turn away, just do it. That is, turn away. Take yourself a comma break. Maybe you go back, maybe you don't. Maybe you go back somewhere close. But don't try and be subtle about it. And don't keep staying there when you are pushing against a brick wall. There's nothing to feel guilty about, and there's no excuse to make. If you understood enough to undertake something really new, and then this really new activity begins to feel as though it's a brick wall, turn away from it. Give yourself a break. That's plain enough, isn't it? And don't suffer over it. Just turn away. I want to leave you. I remember one time lately we left on a high note. You remember that one? Ah! All right. To make up for that, turn the camera around, to give you something to think about, to lose sleep over. The discovery of the existence of the insulting force. Just remember this, it's coming. Think about that.